The summer of 1891 bore down hard on the plains of Nebraska, dry enough to split a fence post clean in half, and hot enough to make the devil take off his coat. The sun rose early, lingered long, and baked the earth until it cracked like old leather. There, on the edge of a nowhere town called Rook's Bend, lived a woman named May Delaney, with 3 young uns to her name, and not a soul to count on but the good Lord himself. May wasn't always poor. Once, she'd had a husband, a small dairy plot, and hands that knew only the honest ache of work, not the clawing hunger of children who didn't understand why the bread box stayed empty. Her man, Ewan, had gone west last spring, chasing a silver mine in Colorado. Promised to send for her soon as he struck a claim. Promised a lot of things. But the only thing that came back was a letter with a Denver postmark, and no money tucked inside. Just words scribbled fast and tired. "I'm sorry, May. I tried." Since then, it had been one long dry season of empty larders and empty bellies. The cow went dry first, then the chickens vanished one night, either stolen or wandered off. May stopped sleeping regular after that, kept the kids close, and buried her wedding ring out back beneath a sassafras tree that never did grow straight. That morning, May stood out by the edge of the road, her shawl damp with sweat, and her youngest, Ellie, clinging to the hem of her dress. The sun hadn't even crested high, but already her mouth felt full of cotton. She was waiting on a wagon, any wagon, something with a kind face behind the reins. She didn't want charity. She wasn't begging for silver or handouts. No, she wanted work. Real backbreaking, honest work. Pulling weeds, cleaning stables, cooking over hot iron stoves till her fingers blistered, didn't matter none. She'd work sun to sun if it meant putting a heel of bread in Ellie's hand or a scoop of beans in the tin cup her boys shared. A wagon came trundling up the road, drawn by 2 mules and driven by a woman who looked about as tired as May felt. Dust followed the wheels like ghosts, and when the wagon stopped, the driver didn't smile, didn't frown, just squinted through the haze. "You from here?" the woman asked. "No, ma'am," May said, her voice steady but low. "My husband's gone. I got children. I don't need much, just work. Bread's all I ask." The woman stared at her a long beat, then glanced down at the little girl hiding in May's skirts. "There's fields out past the ridge," she said. "Corn rows need weeding. Pays a meal and a place in the barn. That's it." May's knees near gave way with relief. She bowed her head. "Thank you, ma'am," she said. And just like that, she climbed aboard, the wagon creaking as it took them toward the fields and whatever hope lay hidden in the soil. The sun rose higher. The road stretched long, and May Delaney didn't look back, not at the dust, not at the cracked wood of the shack she'd left behind, not at the town that had never offered her so much as a slice of bread. She only looked forward, for her children, for herself, and for the breath left in her to keep them all alive. The woman's name was Ruth Abbott, and she ran the kind of farm that lived on sweat and stubbornness. She was wiry and wide-shouldered, with a braid long as a horse's tail and a squint that could peel paint. Ruth didn't say much as the wagon rolled past the rise and down into a shallow basin where rows of corn twisted skyward, yellowed and thirsty under the punishing sun. "That's where you'll work," Ruth said, nodding to the fields. "Break up the weeds, keep the rows clear, keep an eye out for hornworms." May climbed down slow, her knees still stiff from days of walking and nights spent curled around her children like a shield. She helped Ellie down and gathered the boys, Jude, 8 and quiet, and Sammy, 5 and ornery as a kick mule. Ruth handed May a hoe and a jug of water. "Barn's yonder," she said, pointing with her chin. "No fire inside. You want hot food, cook out back. You break anything, you fix it. You run off, I won't chase you. But don't steal from me. I got a shotgun that don't hesitate." May nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I ain't no thief." "Didn't say you were," Ruth said, then climbed back in the wagon. "You work hard, we'll get along." Then she rode off, and May Delaney was left alone in the rows, her children clinging to the shadow of the barn, the field stretching out like a promise half-whispered. The days that followed bled into each other like paint in the rain. May's hands blistered and split, her shoulders aching from dawn till dusk. The hoe bit into the hardpan dirt, over and over, slicing through weed and root. She moved like a woman possessed, driven not by pride or ambition, but by the hollow look in her children's eyes when they stared at the cooking pot and found it empty. Ruth didn't talk much, but she watched. And when the supper bell rang each night, May and her children found a plate set out behind the house, beans, cornbread, sometimes a cut of salt pork if Ruth had butchered recently. Nothing was said about it. No grace, no invitation. Just food left warm, as if the earth itself had mercy. Ellie helped with the chickens, gentle and quiet, her small fingers perfect for gathering eggs without breaking him. Jude fetched water from the pump and stayed close to his sister. Sammy, wild as ever, took to climbing fence posts and trying to ride the old goat that Ruth kept for milk. For a moment, it almost felt like life. Not comfort, not peace, but survival, a rhythm. And then the storm came. It was the kind of summer storm that didn't whisper warnings. It just arrived, snarling and wild, with clouds black as bruises and wind that tore across the fields like a stampede of devils. May was hoeing the last row when she felt it, the air shifting, going still like a held breath. Then came the roar. She screamed for her children, bolting toward the barn as the wind slammed through the valley. Dust lifted in thick waves, corn stalks snapping like dry bones. Jude was already dragging Ellie inside, Sammy close behind with tears cutting paths through his dirty cheeks. May shoved them all into the hayloft, pulling the door closed just as the sky let loose. Rain slammed down like fists, the barn rattling with every gust. May held her children close, whispering old hymns between clenched teeth. They were safe, but barely. The roof leaked, the walls shivered. And as she held them, she prayed, not for herself, but for another chance to feed them, to work one more day, to earn just enough to see the week through. Morning came slow. The storm had passed, but the field was a mess. Rows washed out, seedlings drowned, fences blown down. May stepped into the mud, soaked to the knees, and picked up her hoe. Ruth was already out there too, had pulled low, boots sunk deep. She looked at May, her mouth tight, then nodded once. Still standing. May nodded, still breathing. Well then, Ruth said, we got work to do. After the storm, the farm wore its wounds plain. The chicken coop was half collapsed, the garden rows shredded like old paper, and the back fence had been flattened by what looked like a fallen cottonwood. Ruth Abbott stood beside it with her arms crossed and a jaw set like granite. May offered no complaint, no pity for herself. She grabbed the hammer and started on the coop. She'd never built anything before, but hunger makes fast learners, and desperation turns calloused hands into skilled ones. She pounded nails with the rhythm of prayer, not for herself, but for the 3 pairs of small boots she'd placed out to dry by the barn door. Jude helped where he could, holding board steady. Sammy mostly got in the way, chasing the half-scattered hens around the yard with gleeful shrieks. Ellie swept up broken twigs like it was her solemn duty, her face pinched in a look too serious for her years. Ruth watched them all from the porch, chewing a straw like it owed her money. You fix that coop, she called down after an hour or two, and we'll see if I can spare another hen. May looked up, sweat streaking her temples. Much obliged, she said. She didn't smile. She didn't stop. She just kept hammering. Days passed, then a week. The worst of the storm was behind them, but a different kind of wind was stirring in town. It came riding in with a man named Curtis Bell, land agent, smooth talker, and snake through and through. He wore a vest lined with brass buttons and shoes too polished for a place with dirt roads. Claimed he was buying up drought-wrecked farmland for the Union Trust Company. Offered pennies on the acre to widows, debtors, and those hanging on by their nails. Ruth had no time for him. May had even less. But that didn't stop Curtis from showing up on the Abbott place one morning, his buggy dustless, his smile practiced. "Miss Abbott," he said, tipping his bowler hat, "I reckon you might be tired of scratching at dead dirt. I can take this patch off your hands. Fair price." Ruth didn't blink. Fair ain't a word you get to use out here. Curtis turned his gaze to May, who stood near the barn with Sammy on her hip and Jude at her side. "And you," he said, voice honey-slick, You're not one of hers. Bet you'd do better in town. They're hiring in the laundry. Say the word, and I'll take you myself. May shifted her weight slow. You got bread in that buggy? She asked, her voice flat. Curtis blinked. Pardon. Bread, she said again. You got bread. Or are you just selling wind? Curtis huffed, clicked his tongue, and climbed back into his seat. Suit yourselves, he muttered. Storm season ain't over. He rode off, the dust rising like smoke behind him. Ruth turned to May. You got a sharp tongue. May shrugged. It was sharper a year ago. That was the closest they ever came to laughter. That night, Ruth brought May a piece of pie, apple, slightly burned, and split in two. You work like someone's chasing you, Ruth said. May stared at the slice before taking a careful bite. They are. Who? Hunger, May said. Regret. Maybe ghosts. Ruth nodded like she understood. Well, she said after a long pause, keep swinging that hoe like you been, and we might chase a few of 'em off. May didn't answer. She didn't have to, because out past the barn, where the wind whispered soft through new fence posts and the stars blinked shyly through the haze, the sound of breathing came steady and slow, and for the first time in a long while, it wasn't just the children's. It was hers too. It was mid-July when the rains stopped altogether. The ground, once spongy with the memory of storms, turned to cracked clay. The corn that had survived the downpour now withered under a sky white with heat. The well ran shallow. Chickens laid less. The mule grew lean. But still May Delaney rose each morning before the rooster and went to work. Ruth Abbott didn't say much, still didn't, but May caught her lingering now and then, watching the kids splash water on their faces at the pump, watching May hammer down another board on the barn or stack, would hide despite the sweat running down her arms like rivulets from a spring. One evening, Ruth handed her a folded scrap of paper. Your boy's letter. May stared at it. I didn't know it was coming. Postmaster dropped it at the store. Figured you'd want it fast. May unfolded it with trembling fingers. It was from Ewan. Just a short scrawl. May, I ain't dead. Just broke. I'm in Colorado still. Got a busted leg and no silver to show. Ain't proud, but I'm still breathing. Yours, if you'll have me, Ewan. She stared at those words for a long time, then folded them real careful and tucked them under her apron. She said nothing, but that night she didn't eat supper. Just sat by the door, rocking Ellie slow while the crickets sang their brittle tune. Next morning, Ruth found May patching the south fence. You heard from him? She asked. May nodded. He's alive, but lost. Ruth spat in the dust. Ain't we all? May laughed, just once, soft and small, but it was the first sound of joy to touch her lips in weeks. A few days later, Ruth fell sick. It started with a cough, dry, hacking, like she had dust stuck in her ribs. May offered to fetch a doctor from town, but Ruth waved her off. I'll mend, she said, but she didn't. Fever set in quick, burning hot, and fast like prairie fire. May took over the work without question, feeding the chickens, tending the rows, drawing water. She boiled cloth in the kettle and laid cool rags across Ruth's brow, her children quiet as church mice in the corners of the room. Don't go, Ruth mumbled one night, her voice thin as spider silk. I'm too old to fight it alone. You ain't alone, May whispered back. She didn't ask for thanks, didn't expect it, just kept watch. Through the hours, when the stars wheeled silent overhead and the coyotes called from the hills. On the 5th day, Ruth's fever broke. She woke dry-lipped and blinking, whispering something that might have been thank you, or mercy, or both. May handed her a tin cup of water, cool and shaking in her hands. You stayed, Ruth murmured. May nodded. You would have done the same. I would not have, Ruth said, but maybe now I will. They said no more on it. But something passed between them in that moment, something wordless and binding as any vow. They weren't kin, weren't friends even, but they were survivors. And out here, that counted for more than blood. That night, May sat out on the porch, her children asleep inside, the wind carrying the scent of dry earth and sun-baked timber. She didn't know what tomorrow held, but she knew she'd face it standing. She looked down at her hands, blistered, rough, calloused from work, but they were steady. She'd bowed her head once. She'd begged for bread. But now, as the fireflies blinked lazy in the dark, she knew this. She wouldn't bow again. Not for bread. Not for pity. Not for anything. August came mean and uninvited. The sun climbed high and never came down easy. Heat shimmered over the land like a fever dream, and the wind picked up just to make things worse, carrying grit that got in your eyes, your teeth, your soul. May Delaney worked through it all. Her body moved like clockwork now. Hoe to soil, hand to pail, breath in, breath out. The rhythm of survival. Her skin darkened with sun, and her arms grew stronger, muscles honed from necessity, not vanity. The barn stood repaired, the fence lines held true, and even Ruth's orchard, a sad stretch of withered saplings, began to show a few green nubs where leaves dared to return. One morning, Ruth sat up in bed for the first time in a week and looked around her home with bleary eyes. "You ran this place better'n I ever did," she muttered. May shook her head. "I just held it together. You built it. You kept it breathing," Ruth said. "That counts." Then she looked at May's children gathered near the door, munching on dry biscuits and eyeing a ragged deck of cards Jude had found in the barn. "You stayin', May?" May didn't answer right away. "I don't know," she said finally. "A part of me is always listening for a knock, waiting for my man to come back, say he found what we lost." Ruth nodded slowly, like she knew that kind of ache well. "Ain't nothing wrong with hoping," she said. "But don't let hope make you forget you've already built something." That night, they shared supper on the back stoop, cornbread, beans, and strong coffee. The stars were out, scattered like spilled salt across a black skillet sky. Sammy fell asleep on May's lap, Ellie curled beside her with a thumb in her mouth, and Jude leaned against the porch rail, watching lightning bugs blink slow across the yard. "Ruth," May said, her voice low, "why'd you take me in?" Ruth sipped her coffee, then said, "'Cause I seen the way you held your girl that first night. Like if the world ended, you'd still be standing. I respect that." May stared at the dark horizon, her jaw tight. "I didn't want charity." "You didn't ask for it," Ruth said. "You asked for work, and that makes all the difference." A week later, the letter came. Different handwriting. Same name. It was from a nurse in Denver. Said you and Delaney had passed, fever, they thought. Left behind his effects, a Bible, a hand-carved pipe, and a locket with May's picture inside. May didn't cry right away. She read the letter, then read it again, folded it, put it under her pillow. Then she went to the barn, set down the bucket she'd been carrying, and sat in the hay. Her children found her there an hour later, her hands shaking, her shoulders still. Jude crawled into her lap, didn't say a word. Sammy brought her the Bible, and Ellie, bless her, just wrapped her arms around May's waist and held on. They stayed like that until the stars came out. Next day, May rose with the sun and put on her work dress. She stirred the fire, fed the chickens, and split kindling like always. She didn't wear black, didn't hold vigil. She worked, and that evening, when Ruth came to the porch, she found May sewing, an old flour sack turned into a new apron, neat stitches that spoke of steadier days. "You all right?" Ruth asked. May looked up, her face tired but calm. "I buried him already. Every day I waited, I buried a little piece. This just made it official." Then she said, quiet as prayer, "I still got mouths to feed." The days that followed came like pages turning in a windstorm, quick, jagged, full of grit. May Delaney worked without pause, as though motion itself might keep the grief from catching her. She didn't speak Ewan's name, didn't weep, not where anyone could see. But Ruth saw the tightness in her jaw, the way May sat just a bit longer by the fire each night, as if waiting for a voice that had never come. The farm, however, thrived. Corn began to stand taller, beans twisted up their poles, and the hens laid more regular. It wasn't prosperity by any measure, but it was stability, a rare kind of wealth in hard times. One afternoon, while Ruth was shelling peas and May was hauling water, a shadow crossed the yard. Not the kind that belonged to a cloud. It was Curtis Bell again, his buggy even shinier than before, His smile oiled up like a snake on a hot rock. "Still alive out here, I see," he drawled, stepping down. May didn't answer. She kept pouring water into the trough, like he wasn't worth the words. Ruth stood, slow and deliberate. "You got business, Belle?" "Always," he said. "Word is the rail company's moving through this county. Surveyors spotted signs of a track coming from the south. Your land, Miss Abbott, might soon be worth more than beans and blisters." Ruth crossed her arms. "That a fact?" Belle nodded, smiling like he'd just won a poker hand with an ace up his sleeve. "Could fetch 5 times what I offered before. Might be a smart time to cash out." May stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron. "You sell it, where do you go?" Belle turned to her, taken aback. "Ma'am, you sell the land. What happens to the folks who worked it? The ones who fed children on cornbread and dreams? What price you put on that?" He looked at her like she'd spoken Apache. Then he chuckled. "Ain't personal. Just business." May stepped closer. "Everything's personal when you're hungry." Curtis Bell hesitated. His eyes flicked to Ruth, who gave him a look that could shatter stone. "You best leave," she said. And he did. That night, Ruth sat by the fire and poured 2 mugs of the good coffee, the kind she only broke out for company or sorrow. "Land's got value," she said. "We could sell. Move somewhere easier." May took the cup but said nothing. "I'd understand," Ruth added, "if you wanted to take the kids to town. Maybe find schooling, a future." May stared into the flames. "This is their future," she said. "They got food, work, air that ain't choked with coal. Ain't perfect, but it's real." Ruth sipped slow. "Then we stay." The next morning, May found something on the porch rail, a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside, her old ring, the one she'd buried months ago under the sassafras tree. Alongside it, a note in Ruth's scrawl. "Sometimes a woman's got to let go to hold on. I figured you might want it back, now that you've carried the weight and didn't break beneath it." May stood there a long time, the ring resting in her palm. She didn't put it on. She just closed her fingers around it tight. Later that day, a new family passed through, dust-covered, wagon broken, child sick with heat. They knocked on the door, same way May once had. Ruth started to say no, but May opened the door wide and said, "You can work for a meal." Just like she had. September crept in slow and golden, with skies soft as worn denim and evenings that smelled of hay and hearth smoke. The worst of summer's bite was behind them. The fields, though patched and stubborn, bore fruit enough to fill a cellar and set aside seed for next year. May Delaney stood beneath the sun, her back sore, hands raw, but her heart, somehow, no longer hollow. The family they'd taken in, Clancy and Mags Thatcher and their boy Henry, worked hard for their meals. Clancy mended the broken yoke. Mags churned butter in the cool shade. And little Henry, despite a bad cough, smiled more each day, especially when Ellie shared her cornbread or Jude showed him how to fix a chicken wire gate. One night, around the fire, Ruth said, "Ain't it something? This house has never had so many people under one roof, and I ain't pulled my hair out yet." May chuckled low. "Ain't just the roof. It's what we built beneath it." She didn't mean the floorboards. She meant trust, sweat, shared silence, bread split without keeping score. The next Sunday, May walked with her children to the old chapel past the creek, a place folks only visited on holidays or funerals. The door creaked like it had forgotten its own voice, and inside, dust danced in sunbeams across bare pews. May knelt and whispered, "I ain't here for miracles. I just want strength to hold on to what we've got." She didn't ask for money, didn't ask for ease, just for enough. When she left, the children picked wildflowers by the edge of the fence. Ellie tucked one behind May's ear and said, "You look like a lady now." May smiled. "I feel like a mother." That winter came gentler than most. Firewood stacked high, bellies full. The porch filled with boot steps and laughter, faint but real. One evening, as snow flurried light as feathers, Ruth looked out the window and said, "Never figured I'd be surrounded by this much noise again." May stood beside her. "Noise ain't so bad when it's warm." They stood in silence a while longer. Then Ruth said, You ever think about putting your name on this land? May turned, startled. My name? You're part of it now. You bled for it same as me. And I ain't got kin. Thought maybe we make it ours. May swallowed, her throat thick. Ruth, that's too much. No, Ruth said, her voice firm. It's exactly enough. Come spring, they planted twice as much. Mag started a garden. Jude learned to plow. Ellie read from the Bible each evening in a voice like birdsong. And one day, May stood at the edge of the orchard, with a sassafras tree, still leaned like it had a secret. She dug beneath the roots, and this time, instead of burying something, she planted the locket from Ewan, not from anger, not to forget, but to return it to the soil. Let it be part of the roots that fed something new. She bowed her head, but this time not in sorrow, in thanks. The story ends like this, friend. A woman once begged, not for riches, not for rest, but for bread to keep her children breathing. And what she found wasn't charity or pity. It was a place, a purpose, and the kind of love you earn with grit, not words. May Delaney never left that farm, because sometimes, when you kneel in desperation, you rise as something unbreakable,